would like to introduce Navadvip Prabhu, our Sandarbha editor, who has been working with Babaji for over 20 years.
Yes.
And he's now working on the last section of Prita Sandarbha, and he's very excited that it will soon be completed, this wonderful work. And today he'll give us a little glimpse into the universalism of the Sandarbhas. Thank you.
So you'll have to excuse me for my informal approach. I'm not accustomed to giving class in a formal setting, but I wanted to be writing certain things down, some key concepts. These are not things that you are required to write unless you feel inspired to do so. But I've entitled this discussion Universalism in the Sandarbhas, and you might be curious, what does this actually mean? Because if we go back to the very beginning of the Tattva Sandarbha, I believe it's in the sixth shlok, Jiva Gosvami makes it very clear that the Sandarbhas are meant specifically for those whose sole interest is to dedicate their life to the bhajan of Bhagavan Sri Krishna. So it seems that in this statement that his focus or his audience is highly specific. So this raises the question, if Jiva Goswami's audience is so specific, then how can the Sandarbhas simultaneously be universal? Here, by universal, we mean that the ideas, the core ideas contained in the Sandarbhas are applicable for all of spirituality, all spiritual paths. And not only for all spiritual paths, but they may have many important realizations for humanity at large in many, many different knowledge disciplines, especially disciplines such as psychology and cognitive science. So this is, I'm raising the question at the very beginning, that what is the significance of this idea? That Jiva Goswami's writing is of a very universal nature. And let's say that this insight is something that has come, now that we're approaching the conclusion of this work, so that the picture of the Sandarbhas as a whole is emerging. And the first point I would like to make is that if Jiva's intent was not in fact to bring out the universality of this message, then he would not have gone to such extreme lengths to express, let's say, communicate his message in such complex and elaborated terms that really indeed suggest their relevance, far beyond just the community of seekers who are interested in the bhajan of Krishna. Now, of course, that will always be the primary audience. The whole discussion, even in its most universal terms, is leading to that point. But it is elaborated in such a way that it has relevance on a very, very wide scale. And I think that this is something that we're coming to see more and more with in a sense, the emerging of all wisdom traditions. I think a small sample of this was the meeting that just took place in Govardhan, where it was a meeting of many, many different sampradayas, primarily the Vaishnava sampradayas. But in this kind of a meeting, it goes beyond ecumenicalism. Now, ecumenicalism is something that has been going on for a long time, but the spirit of it was more a spirit of, let's say, common respect, for other traditions, but not necessarily a approach, a sort of openness that would invite, actually being impacted in a significant way by looking into other traditions. And I think with, with the globalization that is going on, with all wisdom traditions being readily available to us, a deeper kind of integration can take place. And this has kind of been the focus of my own study and let's say of my own contribution to the Sandarbhas, is to bring in a kind of language that lends to this kind of integration. So I wanted to pinpoint some of the important universal concepts that are readily found in the Sandarbhas. So, of course, the main topics that we find in the Sandarbhas are, first of all, Praman and Prameya. This is the starting point of the whole discussion. So in Western terms, Praman is epistemology. And Prameya is ontology. Now, I'm already going to be running out of room here. So in epistemology, one of the key concepts introduced by Jiva Gosvami is Vachya-Vachyak Sambandha. Right now, I'm going to start by just pinpointing some of these key things, and then I will come back to them and elaborate on them. In ontology, we have the idea of Visheshan, Visheshya, and Vishisht. So basically, the Praman is dealt with in the very first volume, in the Tattva-Sandarbha, and the Prameya covers from the latter part of Tattva-Sandarbha all the way through to the end of Krishna-Sandarbha. Of course, this will get into the topics of both of these, or in between them, we'll get into the topics of Sambandha, Abhideya, and prayojan. I might have misspelled something here. Then under avideya, which essentially concerns sadhana, can be summed up in Jiva Goswami's terms as Samukh. And prayojan equals, or prayojan deals with the topic of mukti, which can be defined as paratattva sakshatkar, which equals prem. So this is just a very sort of brief overview of the key topics that are discussed in the Sandarbhas. And what I want to elaborate now is how these are universal in nature. So we're going to start with epistemology. And the key term that Jiva Goswami brings up here, this Vachya-Vachak Sambandha. Now, those of you that have been following Babaji's courses and have already been through many of these topics know that in the Tattva Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami, first of all, establishes the Śrīmad-Bhāgavata, or the Bhagavad Puran, as his primary praman. And in order to do that, he quotes a series of verses, to build the case, from statements from the original Vedas, leading up to, let's say, the Bhagavat, to show that the Bhagavat is a valid means of knowing for the reality that is discussed in the Sandarbhas, namely Bhagavan. Now, this is, even from the point of view of, let's say, the Vedic paths, this was radical for his time. Because the schools of Vedanta, they had to establish their authority on the Prasthana-trayi, the Gita, the Upanishads, and the Vedanta Sutra. So already to establish Śrīmad-Bhāgavata as his primary praman was quite a radical step in his day, 500 years ago. Now, from the point of view of Western philosophy, this would not be considered let's say, a very, let's say they would not accept it as a valid epistemology at all, because they don't accept scripture as the starting point for any valid discussion of truth. So how does Jiva Goswami's treatment of epistemology, how is it relevant in our day and time? I mean, let's say for those who are already committed to the path, don't have a problem with it, because we already accept the authority of the Vedas, the Upanishads, and so on. We accept the authority of Śrīmad-Bhāgavata. So we are happy to proceed from that point forward. But what I wanted to say was that in this term, Vachya-Vachak Sambandha, actually addresses a very important point that brings in a relevance for modernity. Now, first of all, the word sambandha is key here, because what it tells us is that in the process of knowing, okay, in the process of coming to know ourselves, in the process of coming to know reality, and the relationship between the self and reality, it involves a sambandha. It involves a relation. And a relation entails a participation with that we're trying to know. So the terms vachya vachya refers to the referent, that which is to be known. And the vachak is the referring text. Now, there can be two approaches to the study of Scripture. Let's say the common or conventional approach, and an approach which brings us into immediate experience of what is being referred to. That, in a sense, allows for the immediate disclosure of the reality that we're trying to know. Now, in the conventional approach, we read the text. In a sense, we process the text in an intellectual manner by familiarizing ourselves with the concepts, becoming, let's say, approach it as a body of knowledge to be intellectually assimilated. Basically, we approach it as a series of propositions, a series of truth propositions to be, let's say, in a sense, mastered, from an intellectual point of view, so that we walk away with a theoretical understanding of the philosophy. Now, what is the deeper significance of this Vachya-Vachak Sambandha is that it is inviting us to participate directly with the reality being described through the text. I've been studying various mystical traditions in the world religions, and in the Christian mystical tradition, they speak about something called Lectio Divina, which is a kind of divine reading. And they're actually speaking about this same kind of process. And what it involves is not just approaching it as a set of propositions to be mastered, but as something to be entered into through a relationship. Now we know, of course, that the name of Krishna, the name and the named are one and the same. So as you can either chant the name as referring, to, some reality, some distant reality that we are trying to know, but we feel separated from, and we're, undergoing a process to eventually attain that reality. Or we can chant the name in the spirit that the name is Krishna himself. And that the very utterance of the name is to be in direct communication with that reality, here and now. This completely changes the nature of the bhajan. So the same thing is being suggested here by this term Vachya-Vachak Sambandha. We are being invited to participate in a relationship with the text that is self-disclosive. And this changes the whole nature of the reading. We are no longer approaching it as merely as a set of propositions, to be cognized, but in the very reading, in every word, the self, in other words, our authentic self is being disclosed. In the very act of reading, we are being changed. We are being changed in this participatory relation with the reality that is being disclosed through the shabda. Now, as our sense of self is being transformed, then the capacity to realize the reality that is unfolding in the text is enhanced. In a sense, there's this continuous back and forth exchange that is going on. The text is revealing ourself. And with the revelation of the self, the reality that the self is in relation with is being disclosed. And this is a constantly evolving process as we go through the text. And all of this is indicated in this Vachya-Vachak Sambandha. So, and this of course also points to the very nature of shabda as self-revealing sound. Again, shabda has the same connotation as the names of God. It has the same connotation in the sense that if we enter into this if we approach it in this way, the text becomes self-revealing. And these very words, Praman and Prameya, further imply I'm missing one here. Yes. Okay, so Praman and Parameya further imply Prama, which is valid knowledge. Praman is the means of valid knowledge. Prama is valid knowledge itself, and Pramatri is the agent of knowing. So if there is Praman and Prameya, there necessarily has to be an agent of the process of knowing, and valid knowledge itself, which is the result of the investigation, the result of entering into this participatory relation with the text and that which it points to. So in this sense, this is further emphasizing this sambandha, that these are the various elements that enter into the sambandha, the relationship between the text and that which it discloses. Now, as a, let's say, this whole disclosure of sambandha, abhideya, and prayojan is kind of a intermediary topic in between Praman and Prameya. And even, let's say, this is how it's presented in the Tattva Sandarbha, that after the brief but very significant treatment of Praman in the Tattva Sandarbha, before Jiva Goswami fully embarks in the discussion of Prameya, or the subject to be known, there's this intermediary discussion of how the topics to be discussed are disclosed. And this is particularly in the Samadhi of Vyas, but also briefly treated in the Samadhi of Shukadev. So in both of these cases, there was a direct disclosure in the state of Samadhi of these three principal topics, which form the topic of discussion for the entire Sandarbhas, proceeding after the discussion of Brahman. So again, this is reinforcing the same ideas. It's reinforcing this idea about the Vachya-Vachak Sambandha. That this is by entering into this relation with the reality that is self-disclosing, these topics were shown to be the key topics to be discussed in the text. The very fact that they were disclosed in both cases, in the case of Shukadev, through his open eyes samadhi, that he was already on the liberated, on the liberated platform. Brahman realized in the womb. So in that sense, he was not lacking anything. But the story goes that Vyas was, trying to bring him back to the ashram in order to impart the Bhagavat to him. And, so some of Vyas's disciples were looking for him and reciting some verses from the Bhagavat. And when Shukadev heard these verses, they created a transformation in the heart. Now, for someone that's already fully enlightened, fully Brahman realized, what sort of transformation could take place? Only a transformation or only a deeper disclosure of the same reality. And there was a simultaneous awakening of prema. So let's say there was a simultaneous awakening of the reality of Bhagavan as transcending Brahman, as prema or love for Bhagavan as the end state to be attained, and from his hearing of the shlokas that awaken this transformation, the disclosure of bhakti as the means. So all of this occurred simultaneously in his case in what I'm referring to as open eyes samadhi. In the case of Vyas, there was the same type of awakening in the traditional form of samadhi. So the very fact that Jiva Goswami presents these two examples as, to show that these are the topics to be investigated in the Sandarbhas, again is pointing to the importance of the immediate disclosure. That again, he could have selected many other statements, from the Bhagavat, like statements that were more a sage giving instruction, about bhakti or about prema or about Bhagavan. But if he presented it in those terms, then let's say the pointing out of these topics would again be propositional. That based on rational arguments, we can show that these are the things to be investigated. But by presenting these two cases in which there was a direct disclosure of these topics in the state of samadhi, Jiva Goswami is again reinforcing this point that what he is inviting us to do in this whole investigation into the Sandarbhas is to enter into it in this relational approach. In this approach that is inviting a transformation of the self in its relationship with reality. And these concepts, Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojan, are very, very universal in the sense that all wisdom traditions start with some particular concept of the absolute. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about Vedanta or Buddhism or Christian mysticism or Kabbalah, shamanism, or any other spiritual path. All spiritual paths elaborate some particular conception of the absolute that they strive to realize. So all wisdom traditions start with Sambandha. Sambandha in the sense of the complex of relations that the absolute entails. Whatever the concept of the absolute is that is being presented, you will find that they have to elaborate that if this is the absolute, then what is its relationship with the world? And what is its relationship with the living beings that are in the world? And what is the relationship between the living beings and nature? In all wisdom traditions, all of these things all these questions have to be answered. So all wisdom traditions deal with the topic of Sambandha in respect of how they define the absolute. And according to how they define the absolute, they will then elaborate some particular means to realize or attain that absolute. So all wisdom traditions deal with abhideya, the means by which that absolute can be realized. And again, all wisdom traditions deal with prayojan. They all elaborate what is the goal to be attained by following their path. Now, I would make the argument or make the case that Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojan is relevant not only for spiritual paths, not only for wisdom traditions. I would make the case that this is relevant for all knowledge systems across the board. If we're talking about quantum physics, for example, or chemistry, or biology, or psychology, or whatever knowledge system is being looked into, all knowledge systems begin with an elaboration, a theory of the thing to be known through that particular endeavor, through that particular knowledge system. All knowledge systems have a methodology that is relevant to that which is to be known. And they all have some particular conclusions or finding to be validated through the system, that is, through the practice that is undertaken, that is in accord with the theory. So this Sambandha Abhideya Prayojan is very universal. These are the core principles involved in all types of knowing. And of course, all knowledge systems must begin with epistemology. They must begin with a valid means of knowing. And that valid means of knowing will be that which is suited to the object to be known. So the means, there cannot be only one means because there are many different realities or objects to be known. In the realm of science, the thing to be known is generally what can be known through the senses. So what is quantifiable or what is intelligible through the senses. Now, if we want to know that which is beyond the senses, a different mode of knowing is necessary. So what this also points to is that within the cognitive structures, the dynamic cognitive structures in the human system, there is a whole range of knowing capacity. This is why, again, I'm making the point that the Vachya-Vachak Sambandha is universal in the sense that it is pointing to a higher cognitive capacity within, the human structure. And if this were not the case, then basically all the wisdom traditions that date back, over thousands of years, that have traditions of realized masters that have, let's say, discovered and elaborated deep structures of consciousness that are, in a sense, passed through in the evolution of being. Like for example, in the Yoga Sutras, all the various, there's not just one stage of samadhi. There's at least, 6 or 8 different, depending on, which commentator you're following and how they break it down. There's at least, 6 or 8 stages of samadhi. And these stages of samadhi are progressively, more and more deep, and they also access or discard, let's say, cognitive capacities of manas and buddhi and so on. And these same or corresponding levels of the self, levels of consciousness, cognitive structures are elaborated in all of the wisdom traditions. And they are also now elaborated in, particularly in like the transpersonal psychology, and even, in a sense, more interestingly, they are now discovering these same things in the leading edge of cognitive science. Because they're in fact trying to apply these things in the development of AI. So, all of these things are universals, that of course are given great elaboration in the Sandarbhas. Now, when we come to the elaboration of Abhideya, which is essentially sadhana, Jiva Goswami's genius is that the starting point of the whole discussion of sadhana is Samukh, the turning of attention towards the absolute. In this one word, in this one concept, he has summarized all of sadhana in all the traditions. Because no matter what tradition, all of them involve a turning of awareness, a turning of attention to the reality that is elaborated on the path. At this point in the discussion, it doesn't matter how that reality is defined. It is necessarily defined differently in the different paths, but the common feature is that all of sadhana essentially involves this turning of attention. And, in fact, we find that in the different traditions, essentially, they're all utilizing common methods. It's either some form of prayer or mantra meditation or a whole range of practices that we find, the same practices in the different paths. Of course, they will be undertaken with a different emphasis or a different understanding according to the path and according to how the absolute is defined on that path. But there are many common features. And the most common, the most basic, is the Samukh. And I don't think that any wisdom tradition would have any problem with this basic idea. That this much they could agree to. That yes, let's if we have to break it down into its most basic concept, this is what it involves. And again, as I did with Sambandha, Abhideya and Prayojan, I would make a case that Samukh is a principle involved in all-knowing. Not just in the spiritual paths, but in all knowledge disciplines. How do new insights in science come about? The life-changing insights, that come through an Einstein and so on. They don't come only through, propositional knowing, or through a logical, rational following of thought. The deepest insights in science, they come almost through a meditational, a deep reflection, which the essence of which is the turning of attention toward that which is to be known. It's by the complete making attention completely available in a sense, a transcognitive manner, in a flow state that allows for these deeper insights to come through. And so now as we go through the Sandarbhas, and you see that you see this is a common theme in how Jiva Goswami develops the topic. He starts with a almost a sutra, like a word, an atomic word, that contains a deep core of meaning. He begins with the most basic core idea that can be agreed upon, by all paths. And then he develops it. And of course, in his development, because, coming back to the starting of our class today, because he's developing it specifically for those who are interested in the bhajan of Krishna, he's going to develop it in those specific terms that will be relevant, particularly for the bhaktas. But the starting point is something so universal that it's relevant not only for all spiritual seekers, but it's relevant for all knowledge systems. And that is, in a sense, addressing the cognitive capacities that are inherent in the human condition. So again, in his discussion of Prayojan, which comes in the last volume, in the Vritti Sandarbha, he begins the discussion with mukti, with liberation. Because, again, essentially all spiritual paths will elaborate the goal as some particular variation on the concept of mukti. Certainly within the Vedic, whether it's Vedanta or Sankhya or yoga or Nyaya. Mimamsa, I don't know, they seem to be more directed towards heaven, but they won't deny liberation. So let's say this is the most universal, because all the Vedic schools will agree, yeah, okay, I can agree to that, the prayojan is mukti. And, even if we broaden the discussion, okay, let's use a different word, like the Buddhists will use, nirvana, or, the Christians, they speak about salvation. So you can find these parallel concepts basically across the board in all wisdom traditions. So again, this is the genius of Jiva Goswami, to start on something so universal as mukti. And from mukti, he now refines it as paratattva sakshatkar, the immediate intuition of that reality, which now brings the idea of liberation as here and now. That mukti, the goal is not something far, far distant. The goal is not something after we give up the body. I mean, okay, that is also elaborated. But more importantly, liberation is the immediate intuition of reality. And you see how this ties in to our starting point? To the Vacya-Vachak Sambandha? That what he's pointing to at the very beginning is he's inviting an immediate participation from the moment you start reading. Stop reading as if you're just trying to master some propositions. Start reading as a participation of the self that is immediately transformative, that is immediately disclosive of the reality to be known through the text. The beginning point is also the end point. The beginning point has the potential to bring us into this paratattva sakshatkar. And this is the essence of mukti. Even if we entertain or discuss mukti as when we give up the body and enter Goloka in a direct relation, what does that involve? It involves direct seeing, direct relationship, direct participation with that reality. But let's say as a precursor to that, or as a preparation, or as a necessary requirement for that, we are meant to enter into that here and now. Mm-hmm. I'm coming to the end.
Just the battery's running low.
Uh-huh. And so, because this liberated state, which is present state consciousness, is involving paratattva sakshatkar, the direct seeing of that reality, the direct seeing again involves direct relation with that reality, participation with that reality. The nature, what is the nature of that participation? The nature of that participation is loving exchange. So, this is the equation. Mukti equals paratattva sakshatkar equals prem. So this is a kind of brief overview of the Sandarbhas as a whole. And, Satyanarayana and I, Babaji and I, have just had a, you can say, preliminary discussion about, we would like, when the Priti Sandarbha is completed and published, we would like to work together on a 1-volume summary of the Sandarbhas as a whole, and we would like to bring out many of these themes, to, let's say, make it more immediately accessible, because, as you know, the Sandarbhas is a vast enterprise to study as a whole. So to make it, let's say, available, and again to bring out some of these very, very important universal concepts that can have a significant impact on the modern global world. So I'd like to stop there for today, and if you have any questions, we can take a few minutes. Otherwise, we can stop here. Yes?
What do you think? Thank you very much for the summary and your perspective on the Sandarbhas. I'm really curious to hear what would be the impact on the modern world that you would imagine by, to produce with such a summary book that would bring out these concepts.
I've tried to elaborate like how some of these concepts of Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojan, and Samukh, for example, these in particular have universal application for all knowledge systems. So let's say by elaborating how that is so, it's possible that these ideas can start to have an impact for disciplines like modern psychology, cognitive science, and even some of the sciences, some of the hard sciences. To give you an example, like recently I've been studying some cognitive science, but also the development of Western thought and Western culture, beginning from the Greeks, beginning from, obviously, from Socrates and Plato, and in particular, what is come to be known as Neoplatonism. And in my investigation into this, my feeling is that like Neoplatonism is kind of like the Vedanta of the West, and it has had such a significant impact on Western knowledge, Western culture, that's evolved through many phases over more than let's say a 2,500 year period, and Vedanta has had a similar impact within India, but we also see that even unknowingly, Shankar's Vedanta has, had such an impact on, even in the West, such that we find that that modern ideas about spirituality tend so much toward impersonalism, even if they don't know where it's coming from. Even if they don't know that, this is prominently coming from Shankar Vedanta, it has filtered into, so many streams of knowledge. Now, what has not taken place, let's say, like bhakti, has tended to be reduced to, sentimentalism and so on. The Sandarbhas have the capacity to answer, to address this impersonal strain in dynamic terms, if they are presented in, this is why we've been attempting to present them in very modern terms, in language appropriate to be able to exert this kind of influence. So let's say we didn't really get into it today, but this Visheshan, Vishesha, Vishisht is a key concept to begin to bring this understanding in order to show that let's say the personal aspect of God actually transcends the impersonal. And what sort of impact that can have, that kind of understanding can have for many knowledge disciplines. So the work, Jiva Goswami has laid the foundation in the Sandarbhas. This is why I was saying that in spite of the fact that he has written it in particular for the bhaktas, but he has elaborated in such terms that it is capable of disclosing the personal aspect of God. Because let's face it, at least within the Western tradition, by the time we come to modernity, philosophers like Nietzsche and so on, who declared, God is dead, like basically the Christian concept of the Creator God, Judeo-Christian concept of the Creator God, was found to be unsatisfactory. So there are, in a sense, valid reasons why the impersonal approach to the Absolute was found to be more appealing to the modern mindset. So the Sandarbhas are elaborated in such deep philosophical terms, using these universal concepts, that it can create a revolution in the fields of philosophy, psychology, and so on, that filters into many other dimensions of culture and life. And at least our translation of the first canto of Śrīmad-Bhāgavata, which is more or less ready to be published, but it'll take some time before it actually comes out. But we've written a preface there that introduces this discussion. So this is kind of a starting point, in a way, to open up this topic. Mm-hmm.
There's one question from Krishna Sharan Baba.
Pranams, Navadvip ji, am I audible?
Haribol.
Yes.
I'd just like to ask a question about, if I understand the premise, I'd just like to see if I understand the premise of what you've presented today.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you speak of the Vachya-Vachaka Sambandha,
Mm-hmm.
as per the text, the Sambandha exists between the text and the object that the text refers to.
Yes.
So you're you're saying that as soon as we have a vacha and a vachaka, there's an implied shrota. Or as soon as we have praman and prameya, there's an implied pramatri.
Precisely,
and
yes.
That therefore, we have this integrated participation in the relationship that's being discussed. We're also a member of this exchange.
Exactly, yes.
Is that okay?
Yes, because you've rightly pointed out that the sambandha, first of all, is the relation between the shabda or the text and the object which it refers to. But the very fact that we are, let's say, looking into that relationship, that we are, by looking into it as the pramatri, as the agent of the knowing of that relation, then we are brought into that relation as well, and hence the text can in fact become self-disclosing, and this is kind of my direct experience in working with the text, in being involved in the editing and translation of the text, that you can approach it purely in an intellectual way, where you're you're reflecting on the meaning of words, and you're trying to render the words in a meaningful way. But my experience is to really get at the deeper meaning of the text. The text has to, in a sense, speak to you. The text has to be, in a sense, grasped in a meditational state, where what is being described in this relation between the text and that which it's referring to is experienced in a phenomenological manner that allows, let's say, it to be rendered in language that captures it, that captures that experience, and that points to that experience, for the readers that will then, participate in it.
Thank you. I had one additional question on another point that you brought up, if I may.
Yes?
One sort of direction I was assuming you were going to go in, which I'd be curious to see if you had any further comments on, was you made a remark earlier about an ecumenical attitude towards other religions. And I was wondering whether you saw the way that Jiva Goswami presents Brahman and Bhagavan as the same Visheshya with different Visheshanas applied to a greater or lesser degree, whether you saw that as a potential framework for a concept of like a universally central, worshipable, supreme entity that all religions or all different wisdom traditions are looking at with a different set of Visheshanas.
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, I didn't elaborate very much at all on Visheshan, Vishisht in this particular presentation, but this now comes back to the discussion of the famous Vadanti Tattvavidas Tattvam Yajganam Advayam verse. And this verse, I was making a case in the preface to the first canto of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavata, that this verse is also universal in its implication. If we take a very liberal approach to the verse, it can be said that it is so universal that it can encompass all conceptions of the Absolute in all traditions. And the key point of the first half of the verse is that all tattvavits, now you can't get much more non-sectarian, in describing the knowers than to speak of them as tattvavit, because here we're not specifying any particular religion, any particular wisdom tradition. And the point being made is that they all agree on the point that the tattva is Advaya Gyan. And in my own investigation of the wisdom traditions, I found this to be very true. That even within Christian mysticism, I find the basically Abed non-duality in many writings of the Christian mystics. I find it in Kabbalah, I find it in Taoism, certainly find it in Buddhism. So in my own investigation, I find this statement of the Bhagavat to be absolutely true, that all tattvavits, all knowers, will agree on what I have in some places called the lowest common denominator of the realization of the Absolute. That all knowers of reality will agree on this point, that the Absolute is non-dual consciousness. Now, from that point forward, of course, they diverge and they will define and specify what they mean by Advaya Gyan in differing terms. But, so this is, let's say again, a universal that can unite all paths. And even the second line is highly significant, because essentially what it is saying is that we accommodate, the Bhagavat accommodates that this one reality that we all agree on, that is, non-dual consciousness, is self-disclosed in an infinite number of ways according to the core disposition of surrender of the supplicant, which ties in, even in Jiva Goswami's presentation, to the Gita Ye Tamam Prapadente verse. So these two verses, Ye Tamam Prapadente and Vedanti Tat Tattvavidas, they, are working in unison to disclose this possibility that simultaneously validates all wisdom traditions and all disclosures of the Absolute, while at the same time acknowledging that there are important distinctions between them. And that those distinctions and disclosures are in direct correspondence with how the Absolute is approached. So in other words, that will be in direct correspondence with the elaboration of the Sambandha, Avideya, and Prayojan. So again, all these points, they all tie together, and if they can be, if this can be done, and shown within one volume, I think that it will have a tremendous impact, not only on spirituality in the universal sense, but it will have implications for other knowledge systems, as I've hinted at, in today's discourse. So I appreciate your questions, because I think that they are bringing out, some of the important points that need to be elaborated.
Thank you. One last point, if I may. So I wonder if, in light of everything that you've said, looking back at the premise that you started with about the statement of Goswami Pad about the adhikar for studying the Sandarbhas as being one whose sole abhilash is the bhajan of Krishna, whether or how you would feel about reading the word Krishna there in light of all of these principles. In other words, that one who has the desire to worship Sri Krishna understood as this tattva who's known by different tattvavids with different degrees of understanding from different angles, and that
yes, I mean,
perhaps Jiva Goswami's intention was that the people who wanted to worship Krishna as he's describing them would at least have this breadth of understanding about who Krishna is.
yeah, I mean, we actually discussed this in our edition of Tattva Sandarbha, that we tried to, in a way, qualify Jiva Goswami's statement, and not in any way to minimize the specific point that he was making, but in a sense to present it in the universal terms that I'm speaking about, we would have to kind of step it back or step it down. You know, let's step down from Krishna, which is the ultimate, at least from our point of view, the ultimate expression of Advaya Gyan. You know, so let's step, Krishna, Swayam Bhagavan, Krishna, step it down to Bhagavan, and then step it down to Paramatma and Brahman, and then, step that down to Advaya Gyan. And now we can begin speaking about it in universal terms that can have a relevance, for all seekers, and that can potentially lead, now through the stepping up, back to, ultimately, to Swayam Bhagavan Sri Krishna. And I think this would be legitimate in terms of how Jiva Goswami himself has elaborated the Sandarbhas. So thank you for your questions. I see that there's one more question from the audience.
As far as I understand, Jiva Goswami doesn't refute previously established pramana, Bhagavad Gita, Upanishad, and Vedanta Sutra. Did he mention somewhere his attitude regarding these previously established pramana, or it's just something which is put outside and that's all?
I mean, it's clear from the fact that he cites many, throughout the Sandarbhas. He's citing the Upanishads, he's citing Vedanta Sutra, he's citing the Gita, he's citing the grammarians, he's citing the Rasa theory, even the secular Rasa theory. There's practically no dimension, that he doesn't touch upon. So obviously, just by the fact, that he cites all these sources, shows that, yes, it's taken for granted that he accepts all of these as praman and all of them as relevant, to elaborate the point. But he's taking the Bhagavad Puran as his main praman, and by citing all these various sources and how he discusses them, he's showing that ultimately these sources are pointing, to the same thing. So there's an integration, a synthesis, in how he cites all these various sources.
And we have one more question from Shailesh ji.
Pranams, Navadvip Prabhu. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a question regarding this relational approach or relational exchange, which you very much emphasized. I'm wondering if you could perhaps a little bit elaborate of what it takes for that approach to actually happen, so that one becomes actually a participant of the study of the Sandarbhas, as you have pointed out. That's my question.
Yes. In a sense, I can try to express it by a comparison to how we approach the japa meditation. Particularly, in my own case, for the last 20 years, my japa meditation has been almost entirely internal. Of course, there can also be external bhajan of the name, but in terms of the actual japa meditation, has been entirely internal. And if I think of my early experiences of chanting the name when it was externally verbalized, but also approached kind of as a practice in a kind of what I would call a dualistic approach to the name, where the feeling was that although there's the understanding that God and His name, Krishna and His name are identical, but there was kind of a feeling, a core feeling that Krishna is distant, and I'm in a way separate from Him. I'm trying to attain Him through the practice of the name. So the very way in which I was approaching the practice of the name was setting up a kind of dualism where the practitioner, the sadhaka, is separate from the absolute that's being aimed at, and the practice of the name is again in some way distinct. So there were clear lines of distinction between the sadhaka, the sadhana, and the sadhya. Now, I'm not trying to altogether dismiss those distinctions, but what I'm aiming at here is that in that sort of dualistic approach, first of all, you become grounded in a kind of achieving approach. I'm trying to I'm trying to attain something. It's kind of bringing the materialistic achieving mentality into the realm of spirituality. Now, if we, even there's the famous verse, Atah Shri Krishna Namadi Nabhaved Graham Indriye. The name cannot be grasped, through the mind and senses. How is that? Krishna, Krishna. I can say it. Is it not graspable? Through my tongue and senses, or through my thought process. So what is the meaning of this verse? What is it hinting at? So the name is, because the name is identical with Krishna himself, it is Swayam Prakash. It is self-revealing. Now, if I can grasp it, if I can grasp the authentic name, the name as Krishna himself, by, through my senses or through my mind, then that would oppose the idea that the name is Swayam Prakash. So to enter into this deeper type of japa meditation that I'm speaking about is to enter into a state of consciousness that it is not my senses that are manifesting the name. The name is not being generated through my verbalization of it or through my mental conceptualization of it. It's pre-existent. It's existent of its own nature prior to my verbalization, prior to my conceptualization. So what is really taking place then in japa meditation? What is really taking place is that my consciousness is the ashraya. It is the ground of it is the ground in which the name is becoming self-disclosive. So by approaching it in this way, instead of with the consciousness that I'm making it happen through my effort, I'm going to attain. We enter into the consciousness whereby I am simply the container wherein the name may choose to disclose itself. How may it choose to disclose itself? Again, through this samukhyata, through making attention available for that disclosure. So the same dynamics, the same process is what I'm pointing to in this style of reading, where instead of trying to grasp the concepts, to master them, we approach the reading as being the ground in which the vachya being disclosed through the vachak is, disclosing itself in my awareness by my samukhyata, by my turning awareness to that. And, so entering into the reading in this spirit of participation, it changes, the whole nature of the reading. And of course, it involves, slowing down the reading and, even allowing for moments of deep reflection where the reality, in fact, starts to disclose itself, where you're feeling immediately the immediate presence of the reality in the terms in which it's being disclosed. Aside from that, this is something that it's not, even what I'm explaining now is just to point to the experience, because the answer to your question can only really come when you begin to enter into, this kind of reading. When you begin to experiment, with this kind of reading, the answer to your question will, in a sense, be directly disclosed. So, you have a question? This will be the last question now.
There's also Purushottam, Prabhuji.
Haribol Navadvip Prabhuji, how are you?
Haribol Purushottam. I was recalling you recently in speaking with Robert, and I was remembering you, fondly. Our early days together in Vrindavan in the early 90s in particular. So I'm happy to hear from you today.
Thank you, Prabhu. I have a question a little different. Since we talk about Advaya Gyan and Dvaitavad, the Madhvacharya Sampradaya only accepts 5 different kind of Veda. So how will we reconcile with them?
With Madhva Sampradaya?
Madhva Sampradaya.
Yeah. I've given a lot of thought to this as well. And I wanted to say that a devotee, now I'm forgetting exactly who it was, but there was a devotee that visited Udupi some years ago, and was speaking with some of the scholars in their line. And even though Madhva is represented as being a hardcore Dvaitavadi, he's even very famous for his holding up the 2 fingers. But I take this as a kind of slap in the face to Shankar, because even in speaking to these scholars from the Madhva Sampradaya, they were pointing out that in their own view they consider themselves as Tattvavadis. And this term is even used to speak about their sampradaya. And if you look into the significance of this term Tattvavadi, that they also ultimately accept that there is only one Tattva. There's only one supreme reality. Now, in terms of how they elaborate it, they would seem to give emphasis to dualism. In other words, to the distinction, between that reality and the jivas, between that reality and prakriti, between the jivas and prakriti, between individual jivas, between individual objects within prakriti. They give such an influence that it seems that these people are irreconcilable dualists. But what do they also say? They also say that all of these dualisms, what are they? Like, what are the jivas ultimately? What is prakriti ultimately? They are all ultimately shaktis of that one reality. So if you really break it down, it seems that even their Dvaitavad is ultimately just another form of Bheda-Bhed, metaphysics. At least this is, how I'm thinking, about their view.
Thank you. This is good understanding.
So I'm going to take one last. You have a question? Okay. We can always discuss one-on-one. So thank you very much, all of you that have attended and all those that have participated online, and for all the very wonderful questions, that have brought out so many more specifications of the points brought out. And like I say, hopefully this discussion is going to, in course of time, lead to a one volume where we can, kind of synthesize together a lot of these points. Jai Sri Radha Krishna.